I hope everybody's doing phenomenal today. I wanted to talk about a little topic that many Christians really don't like to talk about, which is finances and also kingdom finances at that. Many people have maybe strayed away from that. I come from a background from investing in real estate, but also my main bread and butter is investing in the stock market, is what I started over 16 years ago. And one of the things that I teach people, and also I help people recognize, is that old question that I get is, I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't even know what to invest in. And and what I tell people that investing in the stock market is actually pretty fun and really intuitive if you just look at your patterns and what you do for a living, or what do you love doing as a side thing, or just who you are in general. One of the things that you look at is what car you drive, what products do you enjoy, what places do you love to shop in, if you have a spouse or kids, what products do they enjoy, what places or industries do they really gravitate to, or what's in your home. And you start finding out that if you start looking at these companies, 5 out of 10 of those companies are publicly traded. And some of you, God has given you a phenomenal gift, like a phenomenal gift that you know in the industry very well, whether it be technology, whether it be automotive, whether it be engineering, and that God has given you a gift in a specific industry that you really understand. You can invest in specifically those type of companies. And when you start looking at people who have been recognized by society as being great investors and entrepreneurs, you start seeing that they don't really invest in mutual funds. They really don't do that. That what they really do is they really focus on maybe anywhere from 2 to 8 stocks in their portfolios. You look at great investors and great American companies that are out there, and they're really great companies that you can invest in. You start looking at, for me, I tell people that I am so pro America. I mean, I bleed red, white, and blue. So I love good American companies, and those good American companies are company staples like your GEs, your Johnson and Johnson company, your Heinz, your Kraft Heinz company. You start looking at Coca-Cola, you start looking at Pepsi, you start looking at all these industries that have been around for a while. And then you start seeing agriculture, where you look at John Deere, Caterpillar, those different companies that provide fertilizer, the seed, and all this other things really affect how the stock market work together. And you start looking at how all of us are needing each other in order to function in a society. Because think of it this way: many of us today, we have it easier than Adam and Eve. You think of it, if they wanted toast or they wanted coffee early in the morning, they had to plan like 6 or 9 months or a year in advance. But not us. We could go to the grocery store. We could go and purchase these products and have it for breakfast right at our fingertips. So we can even go even broader and have it delivered to us if you use Uber Eats, DoorDash, or many of these publicly traded companies. So you start looking at those things, and you start seeing how you can see where the economy is going, and depending on what city you live in, what demographic, what area. If you in the coastal cities like New York, Florida, North Carolina, you in the West Coast, the Washington, Oregon, and California, you start seeing that there's certain prices that are different. And you start seeing in today's political climate that people moving more inward towards that Midwest. And at the time of this recording, I've actually lived in Tennessee, even though I have that New York South Bronx accent, which is where I'm originally from. And you start seeing that you see migration patterns where jobs are moving into certain locations and what industries thrive. And you start looking at the economy as a whole. And if you start seeing people who have over 40, I'm 47, you start seeing that you've seen ebbs and flows in the stock market, or at least in your lifetime. And or if you're a business owner, you see that your P&L statements, there's so many ebbs and flows that there's certain months of the year is your bread and butter. Like you can count on that. This is where I'm gonna make most of my my purchase or my money from my business. And then you have certain months are really like the laggards. Generally, for every industry, they have a laggard industry. So then you start seeing that. Okay, you start seeing patterns. And remember that we serve a God of patterns. There's summer, spring, fall, and winter. We know those things. We know there's 24 hours in a day. And we serve a God who's a planner. And it behooves you to be a person who plans for their retirement. Many of you, you think, I'm not an investor, I don't know anything about it, but really? You are an investor. If you have a 401k, if you have an old IRA or an orphan 401k, you're an investor. And those are things that you should be wary that you can actually learn how to protect your money and also but learn how to invest it in great companies, such as what Barron's generally has like top 10 picks every year. And generally these companies are always on there. You have your Coca-Colas, you have your Pepsis, you have your Oracles, you have your Microsoft, you have your Verizon. And you have a lot of these staple American companies that are really give and have been paying such a rich dividend. And you start seeing that if you start taking the approach of how God wanted us to do it, which is seed, time, and then the harvest, which is as you're working a job, as you're building your business, as you're building your wealth, in this wealth bucket over here, you should be learning how to invest in paper assets. Think of this. Many people really don't get to understand what a paper asset is. They can understand real estate. I own properties. I've flipped homes. I have a crew. I have a team of people that I rely on to manage a portfolio of my real estate. But I also started in stock. And just like you may see that you can build equity in a home, it's the same thing with a paper assets, which maybe today you may buy a stock. And let's use, I like Ford. I'm a Ford F-150 guy, and it's the #1 best-selling truck in America. Now their stock in the last 2 years have been going up from like a $10 to a $15 range. And we call that channeling stocks, where you could take something and buy it for 10, write it up, wait for a couple of months and write it up to 15 and then sell, and then do it vice versa. And it's managing your portfolios, things like that, that you can actually take control of what you have. And as you can see, there's many companies that don't end up surviving forever. If we look at companies like Kmart, JCPenney, these are dying brands. Radio Shack, to name just a few. And you start seeing that you have to be prudent and be on top of managing your portfolio and knowing when to really move your money. And if you look at people such as Warren Buffett, who has really taught us, or has been a person that we have seen in their lifetime, show us how to be patient, first of all, how to manage a portfolio by being patient and buying good companies, such like Coca-Cola and stuff like I mentioned. And you see from every several years, he moves his portfolio from one company to another. An example of that would be when he was selling Wells Fargo for about 8-10 years ago. And then he started little by little with purchasing stake in Bank of America. So you start seeing how money movement and portfolio management is very important. And for the average person, this is a skill set that you acquire. It's not something that God could just breathe on you, but it's something that you have to do it with understanding numbers. And if you start looking at the first 5 books of the Bible, you really have to look at that. We serve a Jewish God. And it behooves us to be ingrained and look at scripture for what it is. And I'm not a numbers person, but you have to think that God wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, 20% of it was dedicated to numbers. I mean, God was so like, you need to know numbers. And for the investor, or many people who don't like numbers, how can you invest numbers if I don't know what these billions and millions of dollars mean? And a lot of it for investors like myself, who are more technical analysis driven, we look at PE ratios, which is simple number, which is basically a barometer of the health of a company. And if you want to know what that number is, if you look at a PE ratio from 0 to 15, usually those companies are undervalued. Kind of in the example of Ford at the time of this recording is in that 6 to 7 PE ratio. And then you have companies that are valued from 15 to 30, which is many would consider that are fairly valued companies. And then you have those that are 30 and plus are considered overvalued, which you have your high flyers, your tech, which doesn't mean that just because it's overvalued doesn't mean it's a bad company. It's just a lot of people are believing in it. And we're seeing that right now with companies like NVIDIA, with companies like AMD, which I'm invested in. I'm invested in Tesla and companies like that. So those PE ratios tend to be a lot higher. Now, there's certain companies that actually run, believe it or not, on a negative PE ratio. And that negative PE ratio really, a lot of companies really do it I want to know why they're operating at a negative PE ratio. And you have many companies that are staple companies now that we see that for a long, long time really ran on a negative PE ratio. One example of that is a company that we all know and love and that my wife actually enjoys. It's Amazon. And I think Jeff Bezos, with a lot of wisdom and a lot of prudency, he really took his company and instead of just, what many companies do is just pay out their shareholders and investors and really invest more in buying stuff for the office. He really invested in research and development. And you see, like, if you really study Jeff Bezos and really study like what he has done for society by creating Amazon, it's really, really, really phenomenal. And talking about eBay, and you really look at it, Amazon's really an eBay 2.0 because you think of it, you have Jeff who's connecting people from all over the world with products that they have. We're connecting it with other people from all over the world that really want those products. And he just created a venue, a place where people could just create a commerce. And really hats off to Jeff Bezos for what he has done. I really have learned a lot through reading some of his autobiographies and just looking at how he operates his business. And you start looking at, okay, companies like that are maybe good investment opportunities. So you look at numbers driven, and then you look at other ways you can invest. Now, we looked at PE ratios. Now, let's look at many folks look at to technical analysis, which is what I love, which is candlestick charting. Those are more where I can see price action. And if you're the type of person that has grown up reading or grown up like in a church that you sang from a redback hymnal, or you're a person that's ever read chart music, really candlestick charting is really a lot like reading music. And if you're a visual person that you work with flow charts, colors, those things, like you are a very just creative type of person, candlestick charting is a phenomenal way where you don't really have to know numbers, but you could see what price does. And what we start seeing that the market is really human emotions. Human emotions. Wherever you hear of chaos, a lot of that stuff really creates that unsteadiness in the market. Now, as Christians, this is one of the things that many people have a hard time understanding this. And what I'm about to say for some of you is going to offend you. Good, because it's something you have to hear. But we serve a God who's an opportunist. Let that sit with you. We serve a God who's an opportunist. How so, Brother Garcia? How so? Let me tell you how. You look at a God who gave a vision to Pharaoh, which is one of the first wealth transfers that's ever happened in the Bible, happened in Genesis. When God gave Pharaoh the vision of 7 years of 7 lean cows, 7 fatted cows, and then he also 7 healthy stalks, 7 lean stalks. And no one could interpret the dream that Pharaoh was having. And think of it, it bothered him enough that God gave it to him a second time in a different form, until God used his servant Joseph. And as we all know the story, Joseph was able to interpret the dream. And what was the dream? He said, God has given Pharaoh insight on what he's about to do. God is going to create a famine, and it's going to be worldwide. And not only that, it goes even deeper. Joseph said to Pharaoh, because it was given to you in 2 dreams, it is sealed. Sealed. That means it's going to happen. So when God decrees a word, it is going to be done. And you start looking at scripture, and Joseph, what was the decree? Take 5% of all the grain in all the land of Egypt for the next 7 years and hold it back, put it in a storehouse. And we know as the story goes, they created the storehouse. And then as we go into the patterns, it starts going into in the 2nd year of the famine. This is where the story starts getting really good. And Jacob sends his sons, and we understand the story of how Jacob sent his sons to the land of Egypt to purchase food. We know the story. We see scripture tells us, if I'm gonna skip over the Jacob story, but I want the underlying tone of this, which is, it says in scriptures that when the people ran out of money, they mortgaged off their lands in order for food to Egypt. They sold it to Joseph. And when they ran out of land, they mortgaged themselves to slavery. So you start looking at how the land that we understand as Egypt now, which is pretty a vast chunk of land in the Middle East, majority was purchased during the time of our brother Joseph. And not only that, God uses it as a testament of this happened. Not only that, I want to go deeper. Now you look at, well, all right, he stored grain. He stored 5% of the grain and the wheat. Well, if you really consider this, and I'm not saying this is what it is, but this is what I believe it is. Really how they cornered the market was through, Egypt really cornered the market through the commodities, or what we know today in the stock market as the futures in the commodities market. How so? Cattle, pork bellies, oil, gas, wheat, coffee, chocolate, everything's traded in the futures market, in the commodities market, silver, gold. So you start looking at, okay, God is telling me something. I understand the story of Joseph and how he saved Egypt. I know that's the big part of the story. But what about the financial aspect? How did that affect it? And why are you doing this, Brother Garcia? What does this have to do with investing? It has everything to do with investing, which is this. God does nothing first unless he first shows it to his prophets. So you start looking at God so much that he loved us, that he gave us the Bible, the book of Revelation, and said, brothers and sisters, this is the end is going to come. We're going to go to a one world system. We're going to go this. Everyone has to be interconnected before the end shall come. And you start looking at that, is that God's already told us what's going to happen at the end. Rumors of wars, the battle of Armageddon, the battle is going to happen. Jesus will come for his bride. And you start saying to yourself, okay, God has given us a clue. Why don't we invest in that way? What do you mean, Brother Garcia? What do you mean, Brother Garcia? Consider this, my precious brother. Consider this, my precious sister. That if you start looking at what God told us will happen, we look at these publicly traded companies and start looking at how they're creating these automation, AI. Those are the new technologies. It will come. God said it will come. So why as Christians we stand back from financial investing when God said, here, this is going to happen? So you start looking at what Hollywood and what this government respects. And Hollywood and this government only respects one thing: money. And you start seeing how companies make fodder of Christian people, and how they make fun of how Christians, how they're non-tolerant or all this stuff. You get it. You see it on the news. Being Christian has been almost like you put a mark on yourself, let alone conservative, let alone care about the United States of America, let alone all that. But they label you a certain way, but they only respect money. And if Christians would gather together and actually started investing, we wouldn't have a lot of the foolishness that these companies try to pose on us. Did you know that if all these professing Christians, and I don't have the exact number, but if all these professing Christians in the United States, I think there's over about 150 million professing Christians in the US. If each one of them probably owned about 10 to 15 shares of Target stock, we could all collectively control at least 2/3 of the board. And a lot of the foolishness that they did last year would not come to pass. But then, there's an even greater thing here. That even companies who don't stand with Christians, I'm all about getting even. Wait a minute, Brother Garcia. That's not Christ-like. That's not Christ-like. You can't do that. We can't get even. No. Somewhere I've read that the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous. Somewhere I read that. So to me is, why not be like Joseph? Why not be like Joseph and corner the market and trade and go against and trade against chaos? That's where you start learning how to trade in the stock market using techniques like shorting the stock. Many of you have heard that. Or if you're an options trader, trading the puts. Or if you want to be a neutral trader where you're more hedging, you want to do credit spreads. And you start seeing how you can actually make money off of a company. Wait a minute, Brother Garcia. Rewind that back. Are you telling us, the great people of God, that you can make money off a company that doesn't stand up with our morals? That's what I'm saying. Wait a minute, Brother Garcia. Are you telling us, the great people of God, that you can actually profit off a company with bad news? Show us your ways, Brother Garcia. Show us your ways. That's why the scripture talks about study and show thyself approved. I took the time to understand about financial markets. I took the time to understand what it is to invest. And I started seeing the fruit of what God was doing, not only in my life. When I started investing in the stock market over 16 years ago, I never dreamt what it has led to. I started about 12 years ago. After that, I invested in my first property. Then it turned into 2, and then so on and so forth as the years gone by. But as Christians, it's time to wake up, take control of your portfolio. You start seeing that stock investing is actually pretty fun. You start seeing that if you have the mindset that there's nothing overnight, there's no such thing as $1,000 seed to break the back of poverty. There's no such thing as name it and claim it and not work for it. You know, there's There is speaking it into existence, yes, but there's also working it. You have to till the land. Many people want businesses that they've never worked for. How wonderful. You've never worked for, but you want God to bless you with something. God doesn't operate that way. God doesn't operate on a genie type of give me this, give me this. God blesses those that work for it. You put what's in your hand, God will use what's in your hand. It was in his hand. And I want to share this word with you guys. I want you to understand this, that many of you, God has given you every single tool you need to complete your assignment. Many of you are called to the marketplace. That's your assignment. And you know that business is birthed inside of you, or that ministry that you want to birth out of building your businesses, that's really your heart's desire. God understands that. That's why he put those dreams inside of you. He wouldn't give it to you if he didn't think you could carry it out. But there's one thing that you must do, is till the land. Now, learning about stocks, learning about investing is actually something that you can share with your family, and you start seeing that is biblical. You start seeing what the book of Revelation talks about and how we are moving to a one world system. You start seeing how, why not invest in companies that are moving towards that? Why not invest in the latest great AI? And you start seeing that if you put money away in these companies, 5, 10 years, you'll be having a nice nest egg. And some of you are thinking, but what about if I don't have 10, 20 years? Well, that's where you start looking at different ways, options, credit spreads, iron condors. Those type of stock strategies are designed for you to cash flow what you have. It's those little things that you can do that'll really change how you will invest. And you start looking, okay, I really have a love for the agricultural industry, or you love farming. You start thinking, wait a minute, there's so many publicly traded companies that I can invest in. Or if they're companies you don't like, you can make money off of them, either trading them in the stock, or if you have a moral issue with actually owning the stock, you could trade options. Those type of strategies, I love trading iron condors or credit spreads. And you start seeing that trading is biblical. What do you mean? Think of it. Who did Joseph's brothers sell them to? A group of traders from Egypt, traders. And you start seeing that even the Proverb 31 woman, you start saying that I believe in the 16th or 17th verse, it talks about how she trades her goods in the market and her business is flourishing. And you start seeing, whoa, look at all these cool things that trading is biblical, and it's not gambling. Especially when you start looking at as an investment, you're a part investor of a company. Now, albeit a very small investor, but you're investing in a company. And if you're a young person like listening to me, or even in your 30s or even 40s, you look at if your aunties and your uncles are living to their late 80s and 90s, you got a long way to go. So you start looking at, if I could take half my money or 10% of my money and just put it away in a company just Coca-Cola. That's it, Coca-Cola. Every couple of weeks buying 3 or 4 or 5 shares, 6, 7 shares. You make it into a habit. Then when you're older, you'll be having conversations like many you hear right now. When you hear people saying, I just live off my dividends. Well, how do you do that? Well, by starting now. You see, the God that we serve for a long time, I was on this thing that, okay, God's got to give it to me. And God was like, you got to work for it, my dude. It's not just, okay, oh, I'm a tither. Oh, God's going to give you $1 million. It doesn't work that way. And you start seeing that when you surround yourselves around a family, when you surround yourselves around community, it really changes your approach to it. You start seeing that, investing, it behooves me to understand, instead of having just your eyes covered. And some of you may ask, like, well, what about what's going on with the election season? What's going to happen? I don't know. But I do know that I am prepared for both sides. I don't know who's going to win, but I do know that I'm prepared on the one side and on the other side. What the terminology that you hear from a lot of traders is I'm hedged. Basically, if the stock market goes down, I have puts on the NASDAQ, which I'm NASDAQ heavier in my portfolio. So with Tesla, AMD, if something happens, I'm hedged on those. So those are the things that you try to, like you try to justify in how do you invest. You prepare for both, because you never know. I mean, you think of it, I don't plan on dying, but I have life insurance. I don't plan on crashing my car, but I have car insurance. Those are the things that you plan ahead, and you hope, okay, God give me wisdom, because the idea is you want to leave an inheritance to your children's children. And that's what we want to do as Christian investors, is leave an inheritance to our children's children. And I hope you are blessed beyond measure. We're going to be crushing it. And I would love to hear from you. Subscribe and keep tuned to many updated stuff that I'm going to be bringing from the Word of God. And I thank you for listening.